Hi, my name is Hernandez, head of community and your GitOps kingpin over at Akuity. And in this video, I'm going to be going over Kargo and how it elevates your cloud native CI/CD process. We've been doing CI/CD for a while now, very long time now, and it's been always been something like build something, run some tests against it. After it's been built and the tests are successful, we package it up somehow. And packaging it up, depending on the framework we're using, for example, if you're using something like Spring Boot, it could be a jar file. And then we take that packaging and we deploy it to some target state. Traditionally, we think of these as VMs, but it doesn't have to be VMs. It can be bare metal. The idea is the same. You have an operating system with all its dependencies for the application to be able to run installed on it already. And really, CI/CD has been the cornerstone of software delivery and really has been embedded in our culture in how we deliver and manage software delivery. When containers and Kubernetes came into the picture, adoption sort of started looking like this, where we kind of bolted on Kubernetes, but we kept the same process in place. What we did gain was we gained a convenient packaging mechanism. So no longer each framework needed to have its own packaging mechanisms, or more specifically, we didn't need to worry about the packaging mechanism. We knew that the packaging is going to be containers. But the process pretty much stayed the same, and we kind of sort of bolted on Kubernetes as an afterthought into this whole process. And it felt weird. And the reason it felt weird is because we had this asynchronous type of platform like Kubernetes, but we still had a synchronous process trying to manage application deployments on it. And there was this kind of dissonance because now we had a kind of declarative asynchronous framework for deploying workloads, and we still had this synchronous process like CI/CD to be able to deploy that out. So as adoption grew, GitOps kind of entered the picture to try to help with kind of this last mile deployment strategy to leverage the declarative and asynchronous nature of Kubernetes. And now we kind of have this kind of last kind of mile sort of effort in order to make things more cloud native, right? To make it more of a Kubernetes native way of deploying applications. But the process really stayed the same, right? GitOps has helped a lot and helped a lot in terms of interfacing with Kubernetes while keeping the CI/CD process actually relatively the same. So what now? Well, really, CI/CD hasn't really evolved and really has pretty much stayed the same since its inception. As technologies have evolved, we simply kind of just bolted them on, right? We started bolting these things on, and we kept the CI/CD process the same, but we're just doing things with newer technology. And I believe it's time we take a closer look at CI/CD and how we can evolve it. And really, what I'm trying to say is that CI/CD is missing something, and let me show you why. So the expectation of CI/CD is this, right? Anytime when we talk about CI/CD process, we think of this as a linear process. So whether we're whiteboarding it, whether we're talking with a colleague, or whether we're thinking about it conceptually, we think of it as a linear process. And this is kind of the picture that you think about when you think about CI/CD in your head. But the reality is much, much more complex and way far from linear. So really, this is the reality of CI/CD and what can happen with CI/CD. It's really, really all over the place. You have probably a bunch of A/B testing going on. You have some canary processes going on. You're running manual analysis. You're running automated analysis. There's config changes. There's many builds going on. There's hot fixes that needed to happen. It's really, really far from linear. And GitOps actually doesn't really fit in this model. And what we noticed that since GitOps doesn't actually fit in this model and doesn't fit in this reality, that people were using CI for things that CI was actually never meant to do. And what I'm saying is that in the context of GitOps, so we're talking about CI/CD in the context of GitOps, CI is actually being overused to do the job of what CD is actually was meant to do. So if you think about it, if you step back conceptually, the CI and CD are actually two distinct processes, and really they have different end goals. So for example, CI has a goal of given a piece of code, build this artifact for me. And it's short-lived by definition, right? CI pipelines, it's really, really rigid and predetermined. and it's kind of like a top-down definition. It's really, really used for like short, repeatable tasks, like build me an artifact, run this unit test, run some E to E tests, kind of short, repeatable sort of processes. Whereas CD pipelines has a completely different goal, meaning that given an artifact, given an artifact that was built, or given an artifact that's ready to roll it out safely. And in contrast to CI pipelines, CD pipelines are really indefinite. There's canaries running, there's manual checks, there's approvals. I know some organizations that run canaries that can last for weeks, if not months. And you're continuously checking these rollouts and these deployments. And really, your CD pipeline isn't actually done until the next one starts. So even when you roll out into production, you're already you're still constantly monitoring and taking metrics and making decisions based on those metrics, right? And it's really, really large in scope if you think about it, right? Whereas CI pipelines are really smaller in scope, but CD pipelines are larger in scope. It requires ultimate flexibility because you're doing A/B testing, you're doing canaries again, like I said, hot fixes, rollbacks, and you're continuously verifying these rollouts with CD pipelines. And so what we see is that in the context of GitOps, everyone is doing a lot in CI because of the declarative nature, because of the last mile nature of GitOps. And the GitOps reality kind of looks like this. So with GitOps, CI CD really looks really disjointed. And since the declarative nature of Kubernetes and GitOps, organizations and teams are starting to write these bespoke scripts between the CI and CD process, and they're just basically shoving everything in CI. And there's steps that needed to take place in order to do a lot of these things, like promotions, like testing, canaries, things like that. And since GitOps really focuses on that last mile, something needed to be done. And we saw, and we're doing this ourselves, is we're having a lot of CI, custom CI scripts to do the job really that wasn't meant for CI to do. And it actually gets worse because this is kind of like a process of going from like dev to production. But really, what ends up happening is that you kind of ping pong back and forth between each step, right? For each stage of your deployment, right? You have basically you build something, and there's a config change. You run some scripts, and then you let GitOps roll it out. It's time to promote. You run some other scripts, some other tests, and then you use GitOps to roll that out. So you kind of ping pong back and forth. So with different environments, you kind of get this ping pong back and forth between these custom CI scripts and GitOps. And these bespoke CI scripts will vary, right? They'll vary from organization to organization, environment to environment, from teams to teams, from people to people, because depending on what you're rolling out, these scripts might be different. And so GitOps is great. GitOps is fantastic. Tools like Argo CD and Flux have helped a lot in terms of CI/CD, but these tools don't understand like relationships between multiple deploy targets, right? If you have many clusters in an environment, they don't really, GitOps doesn't really understand the relationships between those two. It also doesn't provide a pipeline, right? Argo CD and Flux doesn't natively provide a pipeline to orchestrate these changes and promotions. These tools don't write changes back to Git. It only reads them. Like the core functionality of Argo CD and the core functionality of Flux doesn't, it's really a read-only thing. It reads things from Git and just makes them true, right? Like that last mile, as I talked about before. And it doesn't continuously verify updates after the deploy completes. It'll verify it once and making sure that it rolls out successfully, but doesn't continuously do that. Doesn't continuously monitor your application itself, right? It may monitor the Kubernetes primitives, right? And make sure the deployment is up and running, but your application as a whole, right? The actual relationship between your application and the environment, it doesn't really monitor that. And so what does a promotion look like in GitOps? And this came out of a conversation I had with someone at KubeCon once, many years ago. And they were talking about how GitOps promotions are hard, and it's actually harder than what they used to do. And when you step back and think about it, this person was right. So GitOps, think about it. It's one or many image builds and or one or many Git repo commits and or one of many Helm chart updates. And those individual things may have other things, may have other and ors, and those and ors may have other dependencies. And it's really just like kind of everything everywhere all at once needs to happen, right? And it gets worse because microservices only compounds these problems. If every component in your application has its own lifecycle and its own image builds and its own Git repos and its own Helm charts and their dependencies, it compounds it pretty, it makes it actually a lot worse. And I always think about it in the context of you're trying to herd cats of different species, because now really what it came down to is that coordinating everyone to do a release just somehow got harder with GitOps. And we solved one problem with GitOps with adoption of Kubernetes, but then we introduced all these other things only because we were stuck in the old process of CI/CD and how we used to do CI/CD. So we saw this at Akuity. We were doing it ourselves, and we actually came up with a concept called continuous promotion, right? And I think this is where CI/CD needs to evolve to, is now we came up with continuous promotion for a more GitOps cloud native friendly way of doing CI/CD with GitOps. And we realized there needed to be like this mid-tier process that kept CI doing what it does best and keep GitOps and CD doing what it does best, right? That last mile deployment, and really help you orchestrate kind of these promotions, these updates from your environment. So CI/CD, as we saw in the context of GitOps, in the context of cloud native, it needs to update, right? It needs to evolve. And really the idea is the CI builds the artifacts. The continuous promotion mechanism is monitoring these changes and updates to these artifacts. And based on rule sets, right? Based on organizational rule sets, orchestrate a promotion that makes sense at a particular time, right? For release time. And then once it orchestrates that for you, it will collect that information, like various GitOps repos, various Helm repos, various container registries, collect that data, and then do the promotion when everything is ready. And so by doing the promotion, it basically writes back to Git, and it lets GitOps, the CD, just does what it always does normally. Continuous promotion also has a concept of continuous verification and analysis to make sure the application is doing what you need it to do, and to help orchestrate those kind of health checks. And so this concept, continuous promotion, we wrote a tool to help us do continuous promotion, and we are open sourced it. We open sourced Kargo, and the aim is to provide a declarative way to promote your applications in a GitOps environment, right? So our idea with Kargo is that taking the concept of continuous promotion, we just build a tool around it in order for you to enable you to do continuous promotion in an easy GitOps friendly way. And while we came up with this concept, we actually introduced a lot of different languages and different concepts that were kind of new. So I do want to spend some time to talk about some new concepts that we're introducing with Kargo. And the first one is something that we call freight. And really, it's the smallest deployable unit of Kargo. And I like to think of freight as a collection of artifacts that need to get promoted together. So you remember that and or, right? So built on these rule sets, we can collect these artifacts and promote them together. And it's really an aggregation of one or many config commits, one or many image updates, one or many Helm updates. You can package these together. And really, from a technical standpoint, it's not an actual artifact itself. It's actually the metadata of these artifacts. And we collect the metadata of these artifacts and translate it into a Git commit that writes it back to Git for the GitOps controller to do what it needs to do down the line. Another concept we came up with is like, well, we need a place to track all this freight, right? All these artifacts, and basically have a place for it to store it before it gets promoted. And so this is kind of where we think that freight gets staged before it gets deployed anywhere. And then really it's just a CRD that kind of keeps track of a list of freight that's coming down the line. It also has filtering rules, right? So rule sets that you can set in order what constitutes as a deployable freight. for these artifacts. As you can imagine, Git repos, image repos, Helm chart repos are really, really busy with people constantly providing changes and pushing updates to them. And you don't necessarily want to promote each and every change. So with the warehouse, you can put in filtering rules to what constitutes something that is able to be deployed. The next thing I want to talk about is something what we call stages. And this is how we build a pipeline down the way, is what we call stages. And we really try to avoid to use the term environment. Even though we'll call a stage dev, we'll call a stage production, we don't really call them environments because it means something different to different teams. For example, if you say, what is dev to a software engineer person, they're going to say, oh, that's this version of my application. Whereas if you talk to a DevOps or platform engineer person, if you ask them what dev is a boundary inside of AWS, for example. It's the collection of VPCs, AMI rules, firewall rules, things like that. So it means something completely different. So we kind of just tended to avoid all that confusion, and we called something a stage. And really, a stage is a reflection of the purpose of an application instance, right? What is the purpose of all this freight that I'm collecting? And stages include rule sets for how to promote, meaning that, okay, once I collected the freight, how do I promote it? What Git repo do I write to, essentially? And what corresponding Argo CD applications to sync. So if once you write to a Git repo, you kind of want Argo CD to know that immediately. You may or may not want to wait for the 3-minute reconciliation loop that Argo has by default. And kind of like the last thing I do want to talk about in terms of concepts is subscriptions. And really, subscriptions determine if a freight can be promoted and where it can be promoted into. For example, stages will subscribe to a warehouse, and that's how it collects the freight. So with a stage, you can say, hey, in this dev stage, I want you to look at this warehouse, and anytime freight is promoted, I want you to make that available to me. And then further down the pipeline, as you're building your pipeline or your CD pipeline, stages can request freight from other stages. So I really like to use the analogy of TSA. I've been doing a lot of traveling, and the airline, if you think about it, the airline lets me board the plane because I successfully went through security. And if I have a layover, I'm allowed on the other plane because I was allowed on the previous plane because I went through security. So that provenance kind of stays with me as I go down the line. That's the same thing with subscriptions and promotions, right? So as I go down the line, as long as I'm verified by the process before me, I'm able to promote that down the line. So so that's kind of the idea with subscriptions and Kargo. And the idea really for Kargo is to provide ultimate visibility. All your environments and deployment targets and your stages are, you can view that at a glance, be able to determine what is running where and when it's safe to deploy, and understand the change lineage, audit, and history of everything that you've been promoting down your CD pipelines with GitOps. So it really works like this. So one, some sort of process builds or pushes an image, right? Whether it be a CI process, whether it be some DevOps or platform engineer makes some sort of config change. Kargo is constantly monitoring that and detecting that change. And based on the rule sets that you put into place, Kargo will then collect that metadata, right, from that freight, from those artifacts, and then write that to a GitOps deployment repo. And then the GitOps controller does what it normally does normally. Also, Kargo can then on demand tell the GitOps controller to, hey, check the new version because there's a new version. You don't have to do it that way. You can just have the GitOps controller run its normal reconciliation loop, but it's really nice to be able for Kargo to be able to write into a Git repo and then tell the GitOps controller right away. That's all supported with Kargo and Argo CD. So after it's been rolled out, you can verify that rollout, whether it be you're using Datadog, whether you're using Prometheus, AWS CloudWatch, whatever metrics provider you're using, you can use Kargo to verify those steps. And as you're progressing down the pipeline, as your CD pipeline from stage to stage to stage, steps 3 and 4 get repeated over and over again. Just roll it out. Let's verify it. Let's mark it green. Let's mark it red. Let's roll it back if we need to. And in a nutshell, really that is where Kargo sits, again, in between CI and between CD or GitOps. That's where Kargo fits right in there, enabling you to do continuous promotion. And really what I like to say is that the TLDR for this is Kargo focuses on the delivery of the artifacts, while the GitOps controller or Argo CD focuses on the actual deployment of those artifacts. And so I like to, again, I'm a person of analogies. Kargo, I like to equate it to like Amazon. For example, you order something on Amazon, some piece of furniture. Amazon will package that up and put that package on your doorstep. But then something else needs to be able to assemble that for you, basically deploy it for you, right? So Argo CD is more like TaskRabbit. So Kargo focuses on the delivery of it, like Amazon, while your GitOps controller, like Argo CD, is more like TaskRabbit, where it's actually doing the actual last mile deployment for you. So I like to, after going on through these concepts, I want to do a short demo and go through a use case where continuous promotion and Kargo really shine. So this is the Kargo UI here. And when I click on my project, you can see an overview of the CD pipeline that Kargo is managing for me. I can see information about my freight when I click into it here, where it has artifacts coming from a Git and also from the GitHub container registry as well. And it's also verified in this particular stages that are running my application that consists of these items in the freight. Going over here, that freight is coming from this warehouse. This warehouse here, as you can see, is subscribed to this GitHub repo and also this GitHub container registry, where it's retrieving those artifacts in order to assemble the freight for me, in order to promote those down my pipeline. If I take a look at the live manifest, and I'll make it a little bigger so you can see, is that indeed, yes, I am subscribed to the Git and image repository, but I'm also have rule sets, so that way I'm not getting every promotion and every update. Not everything that gets updated in these registries is able to be promoted. For example, I am only allowing tags. So for instance, I'm allowing release tags only to come down from both Git and the image repository. But really what I want you to focus on is the semver constraint that I have. So the semantic versioning constraint is that don't give me anything that isn't tagged and that is tagged with things that are newer than or equal to 1.2.3. And this is the same for my Git repository and for my image repository, that I want to promote these things together. So both of these things need to be true in order for me to get freight, in order to promote these down in my CD pipeline with using Kargo. Now, coming back here, that freight gets promoted down to each one of these environments. For example, I have a dev, test, UAT, and a production environment denoted by these stages here. And each one of these stages is correlates to an Argo CD application that it is actually doing that last mile deployment, that GitOps deployment. Basically, Argo is doing whatever it does normally, and Kargo is orchestrating those changes. Now, let's go through a use case where Kargo actually shines. So this application running version 1.2.3, this container image and configuration is running this application that is all the same version currently. This use case I'm going to go through is that I'm going to make an application update that not only adds another link up here in the top right, but it also, when someone clicks on that link, they'll get a special message. That message is read from a config map that is stored on the container, right? That's deployed by Kubernetes. So how does that look like in practice? So going over here, this application update, as you can see, I have this PR set up already for the update 1.2.4. And we'll see on the files that get changed. So I am adding an HTML page. So it's a brand new HTML page. So that's why it's all green here. So I'm adding that. I am adding a link right to the top right corner where it goes to the route called /greet. I needed to write a handler for that. So that route /greet will run this, this function. So taking a look at the actual function itself, it's a brand new function, as you see here. And I am loading that HTML page, but I'm also loading a configuration a configuration file from the container, and I'm going to read that configuration and display that message for the end user for this application. So let's go ahead and merge that pull request. Let's confirm that. And that'll go ahead and it'll start building the application for me, right? It'll build the container and push that up to the Git repo. So independently, that requires a configuration change, right? So this application is actually now, this actual image, this new update is actually broken if I try to deploy it, because it requires a config map that does not exist currently in my GitOps repo, that it reads that configuration file in order to display that message. So if I take a look here, I need to add a patch file that not only adds the volume mounts for this configuration file, but also I need to create a configuration file itself, right? So here I'm using customize a config map generator to actually configure that config map. This is for the dev environment, but I have to do it for each and every one of the environments that I am deploying to. So although this is not a huge change, it's actually a significant change. So here, independently, this also needs to be promoted and updated. So while this workflow is running, I need to make this change, and it may have a separate lifecycle. It may require a separate promotion process, may require different reviewers and approvals. But for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to go ahead and merge that. And then come back here. This should finish anytime soon. Once this is finished here, I can check out here and reload this page for my image. As you can see here, this is the latest now, running this version. I have the pull request for the configuration has done, and the pull request GitHub Actions has built. If I go over here and I refresh this, nothing happens. Why does nothing happen? Well, if you remember, if I go back here to the live manifest, I'm only looking for things that are versioned 1.2.3, and the same for constraint, the same for the image, and I'm looking for release tags as well. So here, as you can see, I'm actually just limiting what's coming down and being able to be promoted with Kargo. So in order to do that, in order to release this application, let's create a release, right? And so for the Kargo demo app, let's create a new release. Let's call this version 1.2.4, right? And then that as well. That is, there we go. Publish this release. So now I have a 1.2.4 that actually kicked off a release process, right, for this new tagged version. Same thing here. In order to promote this, I actually need to create a new release. So I go to releases here. Let's create a new release. Again, call this 1.2.3.4. Let's publish that release. And now I have this release 1.2.3.4. So now that workflow is ran and this release is updated, I can refresh here and see now I have a tag version 1.2.3.4 in my container registry, and I have this release for the GitOps repo. If I come here and I click refresh, as you can see here, I have a new version coming down with both of the version 1.2.4, 1.2.4, and now I can actually promote this here. So I can click here to promote to stage, choose my freight, 1.2.4, 1.2.4, and click on the release here. This will actually being promoted, which will then sync the Argo CD application. Or as you can see here, the dev app is syncing now that Kargo did that promotion. Once this syncing is done, now that it's healthy, I can actually go over here to this application. And then I refreshed it. As you can see, now I have this /greet here. I click on that and I get that message to coming from the application because these components were promoted together. So, but going back here to the test environment, it's still the same. Same for the UAT, and for production, it's still the same application that's running. So in order to promote that, I can actually go down the line and promote this here. So once that is promoted, the application will start syncing here. Once that is up and running and healthy, I can go back to the test environment, refresh that, and making sure that that greet is up there. And again, and it's a brand new deployment, and it has the test specific test environment variable configuration map that we loaded there. And we can just go down the line and promote this here to UAT as well, the same way, promote that. Cargo will collect that freight information, write that to the backend system, get repo, and promote that using Argo CD. Part of the promotion is that a verification needs to run. For example, this verification, like I said before, can test the application to make sure once it's up and running, it has the actual health benefits, right, from the Prometheus, or it gets the health information from Prometheus and from Datadog and things like that. So once that's up there and running, the application should be synced. I go here, and then in the UAT environment, if I refresh that, I'll get the greet, and this is UAT. So for the grand finale, I can push this. So far, we've been targeting individual stages here. I can do that as well. I can target specific one production instance or the other production instance, or back and forth, or I can just push it from the UAT stage, so that way they both get updated at the same time. So let's do that. So once that happens, as you can see, the little gears are running. So both environments are getting updated at the same time. So you no longer have to just promote those one at a time. You can do it in one push from the downstream stages. So when that is running, again, they go through the verifications phases, and they are now shown as healthy. If I go to the production environment, again, I refresh that, and then I click on greet, and as you can see, that is the production version of this application. So as you can see here, I can orchestrate changes coming from my subscriptions, from a GitHub repo, and from an image repository, and aggregate those together and promote those as a unit down the line using Kargo for my continuous promotion and CD pipeline. All right, I hope you enjoyed the demo. And I do invite you, everyone, to get involved. Again, like I said before, Kargo is an open source project. So we invite everyone to go to the GitHub page, start it, download it, try it out, give us feedback, and join the community. Again, as I said before, it's an open source project, completely open source. You can go out and try it and give us feedback and get involved, help others, and really enable everyone to do continuous promotion and help everyone make their CI/CD process even more effective with GitOps and Kargo. Thank you.